Greetings, vinyl community. I'm back with another 50-year-old record from my collection, and today I will be talking about the fourth album by The Doors, The Soft Parade from 1969. Back cover, gatefold, wonderful bit of artwork in there. Custom inner sleeve with lyrics. And the record itself is on the red Elektra label, and this was apparently released right around the time they were switching over from the gold to the red label. So there do exist copies on the gold label. I think that they may have been being produced at the same time at different pressing plants, because this, of course, is my original 1969 copy and was already on the red label. So, recording sessions for the Soft Parade began with rehearsals in October of 1968 and continued sporadically until the album was released in July of 1969. And this was a turbulent period for The Doors, not least because of the infamous gig in Miami on March the 1st of 1969, when Jim Morrison was accused of exposing himself on stage, which led to 3 months' worth of their gigs being canceled by promoters and local governments, and mayors of towns The Doors weren't even scheduled to play in were saying The Doors wouldn't be allowed to perform there, and Morrison had to turn himself into the FBI because, having left Florida, of course, after the concert, he was hit with a charge of crossing state lines to escape arrest, making it a federal matter. So that was not a real fun time. They had a lot of other irons in the fire. Morrison was working on a movie. They did a special for PBS, which premiered a lot of the material on this. But during those months, they worked on the recordings. And like the previous Doors albums, this one was produced by Paul A. Rothchild. And it was Rothchild who urged the band to expand their sound on this album by adding horns and strings and other additional instruments played by session men. Now, on all the previous Doors albums, the songs had been credited to the band as a whole, and it was widely assumed that Jim Morrison was responsible for all the lyrics, which was not the case, with Light My Fire, which was written by Robbie Krieger, being the most famous example. On the Soft Parade, individual songwriting credits are listed for the first time, as they would be on the next album, Morrison Hotel, before they switched back to collective credits on LA Woman. The songs here are evenly divided between Jim Morrison and Robbie Krieger, 4 by Morrison, 4 by Krieger, 1 by both. And these sometimes confound the expectations that people have when they credit Morrison with what Frank Zappa called the Lizard King poetry, because it's Krieger who gives us lines like "Milky babies seem to be molded flowing revelry" in the album's first track. All 4 of Krieger's solo compositions on this album were released as single A-sides. No fewer than 3 singles of material from the work in progress were released before the album came out during the various months leading up to the album's release, with the 4th single being released after the LP. The LP begins with "Tell All the People," one of those Robbie Krieger songs, and that opens the album with a blast of blazing brass, making no secret of the orchestral direction that the album would take, a great departure from the original Doors sound. And Jim Morrison responds to this big band arrangement by singing in his smoothest supper club baritone. Morrison reputedly objected to a lyric about "get your guns" in this song, and this led to the decision to ditch the collective songwriting credits so Morrison wouldn't have to take any credit for that line. That's what you'll see in all the books and in Wikipedia, but it doesn't make a great deal of sense because on the Jim Morrison composed title song of this album, he has a line, "You'd better bring your gun." So either the story's not true or Morrison was just being difficult or I don't know what. Here is the single with same artwork from the album front cover. This was released as a taster about a month before the album was released, and was the third of the singles released from the album. The second song is "Touch Me," and that also was released as a single, also a Robbie Krieger composition. Came out as a single in late 1968, the first fruits of the recording sessions for this album. And it starts with an urgent galloping pulse and passes through a crooning interlude with strings and climaxes with a really badass tenor saxophone solo by jazzman Curtis Amey, before closing with a quote from the Ajax laundry detergent commercial, "Stronger than dirt." I'm going to provide a link to a superb analysis of this song by Rick Beato, which is really worth watching if you're at all interested in the nuts and bolts of music. The song was released as a single in December 1968 with "The Wild Child" on the back. This is an Italian version of the single. And you'll notice it has a disco giallo insignia. And that refers to a radio program in Italy where they would have a vote for the best song that they were premiering on the show. And if the record won the contest each week, it became the disco giallo. So the imprint on the record has something to do with that. And this is on the Italian Vedette label. I think that's Vedette, not Vedette, because I don't think it's an Italian word. They did both sides of this single to promote the release on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Jim Morrison sang live, the instrumentalists mimed their parts, but for "Touch Me," they brought in the full complement of string players, horn players, and even Curtis Amey himself to mime or sax sync his tenor sax solo. You can easily find that performance on YouTube, and you'll notice that Jim Morrison really blows a cue during "Touch Me." Third song on the album is the first Jim Morrison composition, "Shaman's Blues." And Morrison resisted having the strings and horns added to his songs on the album. Nonetheless, there's a definite jazz element in this one with a strong swinging jazz waltz beat and very dark and menacing lyrics. This is one of the longer tracks on the album, and the first one that has a bit more of that Doors menace to it. Next song is "Do It," the only song on the album jointly written by Morrison and Krieger, and that oddly seems to be simpler than either man's solo contributions. And the lyrics, which are presumably by Morrison, are as terse and direct as can be, and a little bit fillerish, not the greatest song on the album. Next song is "Easy Ride," again by Morrison. And it's a rollicking, up-tempo rocker, and it has some inspiration from Muddy Waters, "Got My Mojo Working." First song on side 2 is "Wild Child," which was the first song recorded for the album and the B-side to the "Touch Me" single. It's built on a heavy, nagging riff that wouldn't sound out of place on a Black Sabbath album except for Robbie Krieger's slide guitar approach. And the lyrics are full of dark and exotic imagery, compounded by strange spoken asides by Morrison. Next track is Runnin' Blue. Robbie Krieger composition and a very strange little hodgepodge of a song. It combines lyrical references to Otis Redding with a field holler kind of a cappella intro by Morrison, driving brassy rock, this jazz instrumental break with multiple horns playing over one another, and these constant shifts to a bluegrass refrain with hoedown fiddle and mandolin and Robbie Krieger taking over the vocal in this goofy hick voice. That was the last of the 4 singles released from the album. This again is an Italian pressing on the Vedette label with Do It as the B-side. And a bit of negative imagery there, I'm afraid. The next track is another one that was released as a single and is the only one that I really remember from back in the day getting any local radio play, at least on the station I used to listen to, and that is Wishful Sinful. Really lovely short ballad written by Krieger. Morrison reverts to his lounge singer baritone, and there's a gorgeous instrumental break featuring one of my very favorite instruments, the English horn. This is played by session man Champ Webb. I don't know a lot about him. I think he was primarily a sax player. And this was, as I say, the one I remember from the radio. Here is the actual single, and once again an Italian copy on Vedette. The B-side of this is not on the album. It's the only non-LP B-side from the Doors' Jim Morrison years. Who Scared You is a really excellent track that would have made a better inclusion on the album than a couple of the pieces that did make the cut, frankly. Finally, the big epic title track. The first 2 Doors albums had each ended with a lengthy song that emerged from extended jams over which Morrison could extemporize. Sometimes on stage he would pull scraps of paper from his pocket and ad-lib lines of poetry from that. For their 3rd album, Waiting for the Sun, they attempted a major opus that would have covered a full album side with a piece that, instead of being a long jam that Morrison would improvise with, it would be built up from multiple discrete sections of song and spoken poetry, and that was Celebration of the Lizard. It never really came together, however, so they extracted the one part that would stand alone as a rock song, which was Not to Touch the Earth, and recorded that for the album, and printed the full poem inside the gatefold of the record, and left the unfinished epic in the can. So with The Soft Parade, they finally did succeed in creating an extended work that was built on an episodic or suite kind of structure. Episodic means in various separate episodes, and other rock songs that have an episodic structure would include A Quick One While He's Away by The Who, or the Beatles' Happiness is a Warm Gun, or for that matter the whole side 2 of Abbey Road is kind of like one big episodic piece, or any number of prog rock epics from later than this period, like Supper's Ready by Genesis. The track begins with an unaccompanied Jim Morrison once again, bellowing about petitioning the Lord with prayer, and then moves through a succession of contrasting moods and tempos before settling on a heavy, plodding beat that sets up a description of the parade itself. Morrison has a little crosstalk with himself as his voice is split into 2, and he sings this long section of the song describing the parade itself, double-tracked, left and right in stereo. And towards the end of the song, he ultimately splits into a whole host of overdubbed Jim Morrisons, chanting different portions of the song before fading out on some of his more menacing poetry. They even find room for a couple of jokes. The song is particularly rich in colorful and poetic imagery, but there's definitely a bit of humor in there, which is a commodity that was not really much in evidence on the previous Doors records. When the Doors catalog was reissued in remixed form on CD in 2007, the Soft Parade acquired a previously unheard opening section, this soft, rueful song fragment, which actually preceded the a cappella seminary school bellow. So that's my take on the fourth album by The Doors. Thank you very much for watching. Do leave your comments if you enjoyed this. Be well, and I'll talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.